Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers, de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau, and I have been very fortunate, Mike and I both, in this podcast so far, to get a ton of feedback from people who have listened to some of our early shows. And as I mentioned in our episode 0, we are always looking to get better. And I mentioned this because one of the most common comments that Mike hears and that I hear is that, I love the intro song you have. That's the greatest song. And that because we are very fortunate to be welcoming to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast the performer of that song. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, Josée Vachon.
Thank you. Well, that's nice to hear. That song I wrote years ago for a Franco-American friend of mine who had lost the French language. And we wanted to use it in schools because a lot of teachers want, encouragement for their students to see what can happen. And I love performing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're definitely going to get into that song specifically for sure. Josée is a musician who's been performing Franco-American folk music for over 25 years. She has a number of albums, has performed in a number of super unique places, which we're going to get to. Even hosted a TV show for over a decade, which is kind of neat. She is a 2007 inductee to the American French Genealogical Society's French-Canadian Hall of Fame, Franco-American Center Franco-American of the Year from the Franco-American Center of Manchester, New Hampshire. She's got a crazy, ridiculous resume, so it is super awesome that we get to welcome Josée. So again, thank you very much for joining our podcast.
Merci. Thank you.
Sure. Now, kind of like a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
I was actually born in Lake Megantic, or Lac Mégantic, which is now a town that's well known in Canada because it had the train derailment 5 summers ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was my hometown. But my father worked for the railroad and moved us to Brownville Junction, Maine, when I was 7 years old. We were really the only I was the only French-speaking kid in town. But looking back now, I realized that the town had a ton of French names. But my mother was able to speak, she didn't speak English, so she had found the 3 friends who still spoke French. But, you didn't think about that in those days. We were just always the unique kids who spoke French at home. And,
no, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Where is Brownville Junction, Maine?
It's really north of Bangor. I consider it central Maine. Some people would think it's northern, but no, northern is still quite far. It's just, we used to actually ride our bikes for a long hike to the base of Mount Katahdin. So
oh, wow.
Gives you an idea, yeah.
Sure. No, that's really neat. So you were saying you didn't really have a very big French community, which is kind of unique because a lot of the people we've talked to from Maine have expressed, having that French community, especially, a number of years ago.
Exactly. I had done my first grade in Quebec. And when I moved, there was a girl Tina, a Nadeau actually, who spoke some French. And they were afraid that if we were in the same class, I would only speak French and never learn English. Isn't that?
Oh, geez.
So they held me back. I did first grade again.
Oh, wow.
So that I would learn English faster.
Yeah, that's true.
And but it wasn't until I went to the University of Maine that I was sitting in a class. I think it was speech communication, and this guy next to me saw my name on a folder, and he said, "Parles-tu français?" And I went, "Oui." Are you from Quebec? And he goes, "No, I'm from Van Buren." And Paul here is from Frenchville, and you need to go to the Franco-American office and meet our boss, who turns out Yvon Labbé was from the region of Quebec where I was from.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, suddenly I discovered that the University of Maine, and this is in Orono, 17% of the campus student body was Franco-American, and of course, the state of Maine was about 33 to 35%. At the time of French Canadian descent.
That's awesome. Now, how old were you when you started playing music?
I was, the house in Brownville Junction came with a piano. So my mother was all excited, and I started taking lessons as soon as I could. But then when I was 15, my parents bought me a guitar, and I really took to that as it was great for family parties because no one in my family played an instrument, but our holiday parties were always in the kitchen singing songs and tapping our feet. And then when it was time for dancing, we'd just put on the record player. But when my parents bought me my guitar, suddenly I was backing up singing sing-alongs in the family, and that was so much fun. And really, that's how I developed my repertoire, was what my family, what my parents wanted me to learn, as well as what my aunts and uncles would request and share with me.
That's really interesting, actually, because we've talked with previous guests about the culture of the soirees.
Hmm.
And my mom even talks about that growing up in Manchester. She attended some when she was a kid. Is that something you were familiar with? The relatives all get together, sing
Oh,
songs.
absolutely. We still do it today. My mother is the oldest of eight, so they're all in Quebec, of course, and yeah, whenever there's a family gathering, it still ends up at some point singing around the kitchen or living room, wherever we are hanging out. But they're getting older, and now they kind of want the la relève, as we say in French, the next generation
Sure.
to take over. So my cousins, all played different instruments, and so the thing is that I don't go up at the same time anymore. It's difficult to try to get cousins, especially, together. So we sort of try to make an effort every 5 or 10 years to get together as a whole family, because we're about 33 with all
Oh,
the aunts,
wow.
uncles, and cousins. Yeah.
Now, when you do these get-togethers and sing songs, is it like I envision anyway in my mind? It's like the call and response
Oh yeah,
type thing. Yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome.
the chansons répondent. I did learn a lot of those. But when you're a kid, it's kind of fun, and at the same time, it's really like the older crowds thing. You participate in some of it, but you think of these songs as old. That you want to introduce. You'd rather be doing the pop songs of the time, on guitar. I remember this band, when I was 17 or so. La Bottine Souriante, the Smiling Boot, was on jukeboxes everywhere. And I learned one of the songs, and my grandmother at the party said, "That's not new. Your great grandfather used to sing that."
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's where I realized that, traditional music in Quebec has never aged. They just keep bringing it back with new versions, new backup instruments, and they keep it alive in Quebec very strongly.
That's interesting. Now, when did you decide that you were going to start performing publicly, like
Oh
outside
no.
the family?
Yeah, no, no, no. That was I was a really shy kid. And I when I was at the Franco-American office, which is now the center also in Maine, one night one of my girlfriends in the dorm said, "I hear you practicing the guitar all the time. Why don't you bring it to the party tonight?" Because we were doing a holiday soiree at the office.
That's
And
awesome.
so she talked me into it. When it was time, I did a few songs that my family loved, especially songs by, at the time, what was really popular for sing-alongs, modern sing-alongs, was there were two performers, Edith Butler and Angèle Arsenault, that I really liked. So I did their songs, and my boss's eyes lit up, and without telling me, because he knew I would have said no, he sent my name off to 3 festivals in
Oh,
Maine,
wow.
and I received letters saying, you're scheduled for the noon slot for an hour. And I guess the good thing about, if you're shy, if you can't say no once somebody asks you to do something, that is a great way to push.
Sure, absolutely.
So it worked, and the first one was in Lewiston, Maine, and when I saw older people, I mean, some were in tears, but joyful tears, but
Sure.
just so touched that a young person was singing in French. And of course, the 80s and 90s was very strong, multiculturalism and ethnic studies and ethnic pride, and so the whole Franco-American office, the Farag Forum was the name of the newspaper, and
That's
it had been created right after civil rights and stuff. So there was this constant pride in who we are, and not to try to change ourselves, but to take possession of our, whether we could speak French or not, which was interesting too.
now you mentioned the Frog Forum, which is hilarious. We actually we talked about that with Susan Panette who's the director of the Franco-American programs now at the University of Maine.
Yes.
We interviewed her for the podcast. That was a super interesting interview. She talks about the history of the Farag Forum, now just the Forum. How did you get involved with that publication?
Well, that's it. The Franco-American office was publishing it. And when I went to meet, based on these two guys in my class who said, you need to go meet Yvon Labbé, I walked in and, we talked for 15, 20 minutes. And he goes, okay, so what do you want to do here at the office? Because it was work study. I didn't realize I had work study money. So I said, well, I'm a fast typist. Wrong thing to say at a newspaper. So I ended up... the first 2 years, I was basically typesetting the entire paper, and it was a monthly. But then I became managing editor and really took on a lot of roles. We put on soirees on campus, and community people would come. And of course, since I had started singing festivals, my boss always got me to be part of the concert or the gathering or so on. I can't really say they were concerts, but we were constantly bringing in guest musicians to really create a fun evening for the community and the students.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, going kind of back to the career, did you ever consider playing anything except French folk music, French Canadian folk music, or is this kind of from the beginning you knew that's the direction your career was going to go?
Yeah, I think because of the times, I'd be doing, at the time there were at least 12 Franco-American festivals, summer festivals around New England. There was a real demand for French, and people were reacting like, oh my gosh, all these songs in French, and it became sort of a niche, that we were only like a handful. There was Liliane Labbé of the group The Sultry, Lucie Terrien, who's from New Hampshire, and myself, and then there were a lot of fiddlers all around New England,
sure.
Franco-American, but for singing French, we were French, especially French Canadian. Music. We were the three. So I felt like it was an important thing to maintain. And I thought, there are thousands and thousands of folk singers in English.
Sure.
But this niche turned out to be really great because I'd say, between school assemblies, I was probably doing 80, 90 shows a year, believe it or not.
That's awesome.
Just in French, which was shocking. Today, not so much.
Well, I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, though, because how you went from, performing a festival you didn't even volunteer for in Lewiston, Maine,
right,
to all of a sudden transitioning to where you're playing tons of festivals, and it becomes like a major part of your career. You're making albums. Like, this is what you're known for, is producing this music.
Yeah, I was actually going to be a French high school teacher. That was one of my studies. But then doing so many assemblies, teachers asking me to come to their schools, and I felt like I was teaching in my own way, in a more, for me, it was a more comfortable way, because I discovered I really wasn't good in front of a classroom. I was so nervous about it, which is ironic because people say, how can you be on stage in front of 1,000? I think the security blanket is holding that guitar and just starting, Took on everything that came along and just developed my craft, basically developed a repertoire, improved my guitar playing, started figuring out what people wanted to hear. Around 1985, I realized that all these festivals, I was only doing songs from Quebec and Acadia. And I thought, I should be writing my own, but again, what? And people, songwriters would tell me, always write what you know best. And I said, okay, well, I'll start with... I wrote a song called Entre moi, which means between me and myself. And it was a back and forth of making fun of my name because in high school I would get, Jose, can you see jokes. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use it in a fun festival genre. And it became one of my hit songs. People were requesting it everywhere. It even got me to Quebec, the Museum of Civilization. Just different, it's amazing how certain songs will actually get you in other areas that you never thought you'd perform at. So I would often represent Franco-Americans in even like government and pre-summits of states in Quebec, because again, they needed a musical something and they wanted it to be from New England's Franco-Americans. So I was just at the right place at the right time, I think.
Josée, qu'est-ce que tu fais là-bas dans les États? pas de français, tout en anglais. Qu'est-ce que tu fais pour rester là? Josée, qu'est-ce que tu fais pour survivre dans les États? La misère, il doit en avoir, c'est ce que nous disent nos grands-pères. Au Canada, j'y vais à chaque année pour contenter mon bec de desserts et chaud sucrés, la tire, la tarte au sucre. Mon Dieu que tout est bon, mais c'est vraiment pas juste. Ils ont tous les gâteaux Vachon. Les cousins, les cousines, les mononcles, les matantes, je suis toujours bien contente de pouvoir les visiter. Monte à haut, monte à bas, le Canada ou les États, c'est quand tu aurais décidé de quel bord je veux rester.
All right, that's neat. But you mentioned obviously you performed in Quebec, which is super neat. But you've performed all over the place.
Yeah,
And I do want to just highlight a couple of interesting locations. The first I got to mention only because I lived in D.C. for like 8 years. You played at Constitution Hall. What was that about? How did that come about?
That was one of the first cool things that got me out of New England. They were actually honoring Congressman Norman D'Amour,
Awesome.
from New Hampshire at Constitution Hall. It was an event called Americans by Choice. Amazing today, right?
Sure.
We were celebrating ethnic, America, immigration, and so on. They asked me if I would do 3 songs at Constitution Hall to represent Franco-Americans as part of the event. I got to hang out with the congressman and ACA, Association Canado-Américaine,
Sure.
are the ones who brought me in. And actually, eventually, yes, through ACA that we started the TV show also. So, but yeah, cool places I've played. Because of that, another event was the Minister of Francophonie came to Manchester and they asked me if I would do a few songs at a reception in his honor. And I wrote a special song for that event called N'oublie pas, or Don't Forget, because I wanted the French and actually also the Quebecois and Acadians to realize that yes, we speak French, but it's not the French you still speak today, because we are Americans first, and language evolves, language changes with your environment. But I wanted the song to say, just, don't try to compare us to yourselves, accept who we are and listen to what we have to say. Well, he loved the song, and a week later, he invited me to Paris to perform it on international television. Even my husband's cousins in Spain called my husband to say, "You're watching your wife."
That's awesome.
It was a great experience, yeah. And a string quartet from Romania backed me up on the show.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, the things that go through your mind when you're just this little girl from Brownville Junction. It's like, wow, this is actually pretty awesome.
Mais ne me regarde surtout pas de la façon que tu te vois. Prends le temps de bien m'écouter, de t'intéresser, n'oublie pas, n'oublie pas. Québécois, embarque dans un train, viens voir le pays d'où je viens. Tu verras des gens comme moi, aussi déchirés par un choix. N'oublie pas.
Now, I saw that you performed in New Brunswick.
Yes.
And one of the things that was honestly not known to me when I started this project that has become very clear since is that Acadian and Quebec are very different things.
Yes, they
Different culture, different history. And I didn't really truly, I knew there was a difference. I didn't truly appreciate the difference or how the difference came to be until I started working on this project. Now, musically, is there a difference between Quebec and Acadia?
Yes and no. That's interesting too, because as I develop my repertoire, there are songs that I would perform in New Brunswick, or actually more like Northern Maine's Acadians, that they didn't know, but then they would recommend songs that I said, oh, that's interesting, like Partons la mer est belle. My grandmother sang it all the time, but it's really an Acadian song. and of course Evangeline. These songs were requests in northern Maine, and when I went to New Brunswick, of course, my repertoire had sort of developed as more traditional or more from the 60s and down, because that's what the requests were.
Sure.
But in New Brunswick, of course, the young people were really listening to the rock and the pop music of Canada, which I found that living here and not having access to Quebec television and so on, Canadian television, I couldn't keep up with it unless I spent my summers in Quebec and really made an effort to see what was happening. But then I discovered that, even if I performed to American audiences who wanted to hear French, they didn't want to hear the pop. They wanted to hear the traditions.
Right.
So that's what I ended up focusing on over the years. That was what the requests were. That was what the need was, and that's where I was getting hired. So
That makes sense. Now, something you did mention, and I mentioned in the intro, I think might be how the majority of my listeners are familiar with your work, and that is through the TV show that you did, Bonjour. Now, how did that come about? What made you stop and be like, you know what? I think I want to throw together a TV show right now.
Well, it wasn't me really. It was again ACA. The cable station at the time was United Channel 8. This will bring back memories to some. And then it became Continental Cable. They approached the ACA and said, we do community programming. Would you like to produce a show with us? And they decided that it would be time to do something. We called it Bonjour because people who saw it in the TV guide would know it's in French.
Sure.
And they asked me if I would host it because I could open the show with a song, end the show with a song, and we would fill with guests in the middle. Sometimes a guest canceled or chickened out, then I'd get to do 2 or 3 songs because we had to
all
fill
kinds
time.
of songs.
Yeah, but it was interesting because when they asked me, we all thought the same thing: ethnic television, maybe a year or two, and it ended up going 12 years, and it really took off. It wasn't just Manchester. Suddenly, Maine Public Television said they'd like to air it throughout the state of Maine. Different cable stations along the East Coast and, of course, throughout New England. It even went down to Texas and Louisiana. They said at one point that we reached 3 million homes.
That's amazing.
So it was a great experience. I think my biggest fear is that I had never interviewed, and so you learn as you go. I was very you're doing a great job, Jesse.
I'm learning it right now as we speak.
No, you can't see. I'm the kind of guest I would have wanted because I talk so much.
Oh, exactly, it's awesome.
But I would get a guest who just says yes, actually, true, and then say nothing, and it was like really learning to pull teeth,
Sure.
basically. And at the time we had to fill 20 minutes to a half hour. Oh my gosh. So yeah, but I learned a lot along the way. And then Paul Paré was a co-host. And then eventually we invited, she came to the area from Quebec. Carole Auger moved to Biddeford, Maine area. And so she was just loving this experience to co-host and added, book reviews because she's now a writer in Canada. So yeah, it was all a really fun times.
Now, were you the one who had to track down the guests? Was that
We
your
did.
job?
We at the beginning, we had someone, a young intern at the ACA who that was his job to
Nice.
search the newspapers, look for French names that we thought would be able to be on the show, because that they had really made an effort that the show would be entirely in French. And I'm not sure today, I don't think that would be doable, but
Be tougher.
we would get, it would be, even once in a while we would find a very interesting guest, like from Western New Hampshire, like Harrisville or something, and he'd say, well, no, I spoke French as a child, but there's no way. And then I would sort of speak to him over the phone in French, and he'd start warming up, and the next thing I knew, he was on the show. Of course, sometimes they'd go, oh, I made a fool of myself. I said, no, that what you're showing is that we're not trying to be, we're not French professors on this show. The idea is that this is who we are. This is how history is evolving, in New England. And we had amazing guests, though. We even got, I got to interview Marcel Marceau, the
Oh,
mime.
really? That's
He
awesome.
came. He came to the area. My colleague, I was out of town, so bummed out, but she got to go to Boston, and she got a 3-minute interview with Céline Dion. We got the Acadian actress Viola Légère, who plays La Sagouine, this major Acadian character. I was performing in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, at the library, and I could have sworn it was her in the audience. And I thought, no, she's from New Brunswick. And then at intermission, they said, we have a special guest in the audience. She's visiting her mother. So I jumped on, right after the show, I went to see her and I said, would you consider coming to Bonjour? And she says, I would love to, madame.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, oh my gosh, that was probably one of my favorite interviews of all time.
Very cool. Now, I did see where your music was used in a documentary, which I think was kind of neat. There's a
Yeah.
La Bulldog. What is that about?
La Bolduc she was a singer from the 1920s and up to the Depression. So from Canada, from the Gaspé region. And she was famous as a Canadian songwriter because the music on the radio at the time was always from France in Canada. And she would take these fiddle tunes or harmonica tunes and put words to them. And she would write about whatever was in the paper that day. So she would make fun of difficult times, and so on. And so they did a documentary on her, of course. There's so many books written about La Bolduc. And they asked me if I would. They wanted to use something that I had performed from La Bolduc, and then they ended up using Entre Moi again because it had the turlute thing. So it was sort of an influence of her music that they considered. So yeah, I was excited, and I've had a few songs used for openings. Well, like this one.
That's right. That's the most prestigious, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course.
Now, I did mention in the intro that in 2007, yeah, you were inducted into the French Canadian Hall of Fame by the American French Genealogical Society of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. I'm just curious because that's obviously awesome honor. I mean, other inductees, I looked it up, include Napoleon Lajoie, who's like one of the best baseball players of all time. So how did that come about? Like, what was that phone call like when you were told you were going to be inducted into that?
I was thinking, I'm too young. No, no, I actually it was very exciting. Of course, I think it was, every time you're recognized for anything that you do, it's an honor, of course. I felt like, you know, you try to do the best you can to support anything with, of your culture. That's been my
Sure.
whole pride and purpose, really, for almost 40 years. I hate to say it, but it's
Oh,
true.
that's awesome.
And so, yeah, it was great. Of course, giving a speech again is not my forte, but it was fine. I think looking back, whenever I'm nervous about doing public speaking, is make sure you bring the guitar.
There you
That's where
go.
I'm comfortable.
I like that. Now, and one other thing I want to touch on real quick, so I ran across kind of interesting. One of your songs was used in a commercial for Christmas in South Korea.
Oh
How
my
in the
gosh.
world did this happen?
Yeah, I was sure it was spam. I really, I got an email from a South Korean company asking if they could use a 20-second clip of my version of the first Noel in French for a commercial for a pastry shop called Paris Baguette. And
That's
I
awesome.
thought, is this for real? Right. So, I looked up the company, I Googled it, and I'm starting to see that, yeah, it's totally legit. There were tons and tons of sites. And so I emailed them back. I didn't, and they said, we'll send you a check. Or they wanted I said, could you go through PayPal? That makes me more comfortable. And the next thing I know, this nice, tidy amount
That's awesome.
shows up in PayPal. And after that, I could see a lot of comments in South Korean language, looking, they were buying the clip off of my CD Baby account.
That's awesome.
And I thought, wow, who would have thought, that you just, that's where the internet has changed
Sure.
careers, even for me, when you think that you're really sticking to New England and occasionally do things in Canada or France or wherever. I've done Martinique and Berlin, Germany also. But yeah, suddenly the internet opens up a lot, where you least expect it.
En ces lieux, durant la nuit, demeuraient des bergers qui gardaient leurs troupeaux dans les champs de Judée. Or un ange du Seigneur apparut dans les cieux, et la gloire de Dieu resplendit autour d'eux. Noël, 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 Jésus est né, chantons Noël.
Since you brought it up, how did you end up in Berlin, Germany?
Yeah, well, I was performing with another woman from Vermont at a festival up in Lake Champlain, and there was a German guy there with a crew. They were trying to look for French outside of Canada for a video they were doing for schools in Germany through the French Institutes of Germany. And the next thing we knew, they're inviting us to come and perform throughout the schools in Berlin.
That's
I keep wanting to say Berlin because in Berlin, and we spoke no German, and the wall had just come down like 2 years before.
Wow!
So it was really, really an amazing experience. They said, put us up in a apartment actually for the week. We just took the subway with my friend, unfortunately, Martha Pellerin. She was a real activist, died way too young, 36 years old, of cancer. So I'm just so thankful that I got to travel with her that way. But she insisted that we bring spoons too. And she carried 100 spoons in a bag through customs.
That's awesome.
And then actually at the airport, they had us play them to prove why we were bringing.
Why else would you have spoons?
Why would we bring 100 spoons? I kept saying, Martha, honestly, I'm sure they have spoons in Berlin. But
No. Special spoon.
But it was an amazing experience again, and just discovering Berlin at that time with the cranes all over, rebuilding the city and going to Checkpoint Charlie Museum, and of course the French Institutes really supporting that. Here's a French culture in the United States. That really fascinated them. That we exist.
That's great. Now, do you still do shows?
Yes, I do. I've slowed down a lot. My children are grown up, and my husband loves to travel, and his job takes him to many places. So I sort of sometimes I have to say no because of I don't want to commit and then have to cancel. Because the problem with music is once you say yes, you don't back out. It's a commitment. Right. I'm probably averaging 15, 20 shows a year at the most now. But I still love it. It's just that I do notice as I travel. They're like I'm playing again in northern Maine this summer for the third time in a year, third time in 3 years. And I used to play there all the time too, but now I think they're just making sure that the young people keep hearing French because they still speak French pretty strongly in northern Maine. I think probably because they're so close to the border. And they have access to Canadian television pretty strongly too. As I travel through New England, I am seeing changes. We're down really to 3 festivals, for example. Again, mostly in Maine. Woonsocket, Rhode Island, I play a lot. I do notice that it takes 3 generations, as we know, to lose a language if it's not used. And so I try once in a while to, of course, I introduce all my songs in English although not by translating, because I find that boring in a concert. I think it's more important to add a quick anecdote about it instead. And people seem to like. I did a show in Brantford, Connecticut this past January. Not one French speaker was in the audience, and they had over 200 people.
That's awesome.
And I thought, but they loved it. There was, I think I've just learned how to present, even though it's all in French.
Sure.
So I want to sort of maintain that as that's who I am.
No, that's amazing. Now, is there a song specifically that's like your favorite song to perform if you're on a show?
To perform? Oh, I don't know. Yesterday, I played with the fiddler Daniel Boucher, which
Yeah, he's awesome.
I got him to come up with me to recreate a little soiree at the Museum of Work and Culture.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was a blast. It was so much
Oh,
fun.
he's great.
Yeah, but he doesn't want to perform anymore, which is shocking. So I talked him into it. He said, I'll do it because I can't say no to you. And I was like,
That's
yes.
awesome.
And I think he really realized that maybe he's not ready to quit either because people just adored it. We have great chemistry on stage. It's very natural, and we performed. What did we performed anything that just came to mind that was creating that kitchen party.
Sure.
And so I like to do upbeat things. I love doing. I revived a song that I used to sing when I was starting out called Mon oncle Edmond. My uncle Edmund.
Yeah.
And people love it because there's a little English part that says "Yip yip, do you speak English?" Me, I can talk faster than you.
That's awesome.
And they sing along. And then, I did, of course, my song Entre Moi because I got people to dance. We did a square dance based on it. And of course, the clogging. I just love doing clogging in a kitchen party, atmosphere.
Awesome. Now, there's no way I can end this interview without at least mentioning a YouTube video that came out a little bit ago. I got a ton of hits right away because you described how the foot percussion, the foot tapping worked. That was hilarious. How quickly, like literally everybody I knew reposted that on their Facebook because everybody was talking about this video. Now, where did you learn that skill? Was that something you grew up with, or did you have to teach yourself that?
Yeah, it was something my aunts and uncles would do it, sing-alongs, because since we didn't have instruments, we sang, and you can sing a cappella as I'm doing it right now. That's your drumming, that's your beat, that's the French Canadian beat. Often I would get requests, can you teach me how to do that? And one night I just said to my husband, you know what? I don't do videos really. Occasionally things pop up that somebody has taken, and I just end up saying, yeah, sure, leave it up. But I didn't come from a time where we could upload videos that easily. Looking back now, I wish. I've got a ton of DVDs from that, and VHS things, and I'm hoping this summer that I can get my brother to help me do clips that I could get uploaded somehow.
Absolutely.
But I said to my husband, all right, let me give a quick lesson here. I know it's going to be really homemade, but people said that that's what they liked about it. And yesterday at the show, some people said, I was ready for today because of your video.
That's right.
So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That is awesome. Okay. Now, I did mention at the very beginning of this, we talked a little bit about it. The song French in America. Mm-hmm. Again, with the comment me and Mike get all the time is that song is great. Where can I get that song? What is that song about? So I guess big question again, what is the song about? And where can somebody get access to not only that song, but your music in general?
Oh, they can go to my website, which is just joseevachon.com. If you want to buy just the song, I'm also on cdbaby.com,
Gotcha.
which is ideal for uploading, individual songs. I wrote the song because we were doing a lot of school assemblies. I was in a band called Chanterelle for at least 10 years, and in 93. And my fiddler, Donna Hébert, who actually pronounces it Hébert, because it bothered her that her grandparents chose to forget French quickly in the family. They wanted their children to assimilate as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And she would tell me stories like that her grandparents said that they went to school, and were told, can't you learn to speak white? And
wow.
I know this is, we're talking when they arrived,
Sure.
probably early 1900s. And
Right.
so that was for them, our children won't deal with that and they
Exactly.
assimilate quickly. And Donna said, I feel so bad that I don't possess this language. But when she played fiddle, I said, well, your fiddle certainly speaks French
That's
because
awesome.
she really, you could tell where she had learned from family things. And of course, learning from the greats, Louis Baudouin and, just a lot of New England fiddlers. So I wrote the song for schools so that we could actually also study our history. And then we switched the song to English to talk about, what's happened. And it's really up to us because I've talked to different people, like even my friend Martha Pellerin from Vermont. She could hardly speak French anymore, though she sang in French. She said, I don't believe it when Quebecois say if you lose the language, you lose your culture. She goes, I'm a proud Franco-American. Yes, I'm trying to maintain the French through songs
Sure.
but for her it was she was adamant about that. And that's a very difficult thing for individuals all over. Some say some still believe that the older people do say that. I think many times if you lose the language, but I don't think so. And it's people like you and Tim Beaulieu and Daniel Boucher, and I find that this next generation is doing what we were doing when I started out, is bringing a different factor somehow of what Franco-American culture is today for us.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that because you're right. That's exactly what you just described much better than I could. Is
Oh,
exactly what this podcast, this entire project is about. So it's
wonderful.
awesome. Thank you so very much,
Oh, no, it
Josée
was a
Vachon, for
pleasure,
joining
Thomas.
us. Again, everybody check out, you can get all her music at joseevachon.com. We will put a link to it on all our social media. So that was a tremendous interview. I really, really appreciate it. Again, right when I first started this project, one of the very first things I did was like, I got to get one of Josée's songs. There's no way I'm having a podcast and I'm not having one of her songs as my intro. So this has been a really, really fun experience for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josée Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at joseevachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.
Malheureux, malheureux.
This program is recorded at the Concord TV Podcasting Studio. The views and opinions expressed during this podcast are not necessarily those of Concord TV. The producer is solely responsible for its content.